Sometimes you just need to leave it all behind. Not because you have all the answers or because you're fearless, but because staying the same becomes more painful than taking the chance in the unknown. The truth is, this journey didn't begin when I packed my car. It began about 2 years ago. 2 years of inner work, 2 years of reflection, 2 years of peeling back layers, asking myself questions that I had spent far too long avoiding. What does happiness actually look like? I found myself in a chapter of life that would eventually come to an end, a relationship that didn't evolve the way that I needed it to. Not something I defined my entire story by, but something that became a turning point I could no longer ignore. Not because anyone was the villain, but because it no longer aligned with the energy I had been working so hard to cultivate within myself, for myself, and my children. That chapter didn't break me, it awakened me. The ways I had been abandoning myself, the patterns I kept repeating, the truth I had been avoiding. When you spend years self-soothing at Sephora, it's easy to get distracted from those questions. It's easy to stay busy, easy to keep moving, easy to convince yourself you're fine, or at least declare that to everyone around you. But eventually the truth catches up with you. And one day, if you're lucky, you'll find the mirror that you were missing all along. And that mirror reflects everything you've been able to outrun for years. Every shadow, every wound, every corner of yourself that you've learned to ignore or stuff down. Why do I shut down? Why do I cry when I feel like I'm not being understood? Why do I shrink myself to make other people comfortable? It was reflecting things that I hadn't been willing to face in myself, things I didn't even realize were quietly shaping my beliefs. How is it possible the mirror sees my soul so clearly, knows every little mannerism, and somehow brought everything to the surface so that I could truly see it all? The triggers, the patterns, the parts of me that were formed in childhood that needed rewiring. The parts of me that were gifts to others, I would shrink or hide out of fear of being too much or the fear of being seen, leaving the world without every very thing that made me who I am. And once I understood that, something shifted. I was becoming aware, and awareness creates freedom. For years, I repeated patterns I didn't even realize were patterns. I tolerated things that didn't align with my energy. I ignored my intuition. I made excuses for situations that kept asking me to betray myself. Not because I lacked self-worth, but because those patterns felt familiar. And familiarity has a way of disguising itself as safety. But healing has a funny way of making old patterns impossible to ignore. Once you see them, you can't unsee them. Once you recognize where you've been abandoning yourself, it becomes impossible to keep calling it peace. And healing begins the moment you stop running from yourself. Somewhere along the way, I realized I wasn't trying to become someone new. I was trying to find myself again. My laugh, my silly voices, or Lisa-isms that make me who I am at the core. I wanted my weird back. The version of me that smiled without forcing it or laughed obnoxiously at something funny. The version of me that found whimsy in ordinary moments. The version of me that romanticized life, not because everything was perfect, but because I chose to see what was worth noticing. A picture only I could see first before capturing it through my lens. I missed her, the version of me I lost along the way. So I went looking, and that search led me here. At some point, I realized I had become really good at performing strength, performing happiness, performing the life I thought I was supposed to want. I was tired of living a life that was a highlight reel that looked good but didn't feel right. I stopped asking, how does this look? And I started asking, how does this feel? Because a beautiful life isn't something you perform. It's something you experience. The moment I stopped chasing validation from everyone else and started trusting what felt right to me, an entirely new world of possibilities opened up. Breaking the cycle wasn't one big decision. It was small, daily choices to stop abandoning myself, to stop shrinking myself, to stop living for approval and start living for me. The life in front of me was far more important than the life behind me. Every time fear showed up, I reminded myself that fear is a portal, a doorway, not a stop sign. Feeling discomfort isn't a sign that you're doing something wrong. It's a sign that you're doing something new. And everything about this was new. A new city I had never visited, a new beginning, a new version of me. There were moments along the way where I questioned everything, moments I wondered if I was making the biggest mistake of my life. But every time doubt showed up, I asked myself two questions. If everything stayed the same, if nothing ever changed, would I be okay with this? Too often we focus on potential instead of the truth that's already in front of us. I started choosing consistency over intensity. And I reminded myself, when has something ever happened that I haven't been able to figure out or make it through? The answer was always the same: never. Everything life has thrown at me, I've always found my way. Maybe not perfectly, but I have never let the fear of the unknown stop me. And I have never met a problem I couldn't solution. I've never faced a season I didn't grow through. So why would this be any different? I didn't need more proof. I already had it. Every obstacle I survived, every version of myself that kept going when it would have been easier to quit, that was the evidence. Not that life would be easy, but that I would handle it. I always have. And that's enough for me to know that I've got this and I've got me. I visualized the life I wanted and normalized it in my mind. I started to believe that nothing I was already doing alone would change just because my zip code did, and I challenged every limiting belief that followed. I remember coming home from the taco truck with Bronx, and the second I put my key in the door, I had an epiphany. How would being in Vegas be any different than this? I was just changing my surroundings. I started to realize your mind doesn't just shape your reality, it tries to protect what feels familiar because familiar feels safe. But familiarity isn't always where you're meant to stay, and it isn't the same as alignment. The best parts of life are usually just beyond discomfort. And you can choose a new version of safety whenever you're ready. But when you start questioning those beliefs, a whole world of possibility opens up. So I packed my car and started driving west. During the drive, I had 2 years to reflect on. The scenery wasn't the only thing changing. Somewhere between Florida and Nevada, I was changing too. Mile after mile, I had a choice: make moves or make excuses. With every mile, it became more about proving something deeper, that I would show up for myself, that I would keep my promises to myself. How I do it anyway became more than a motto for me. It became a way of life. Too tired, I do it anyway. Scared, I do it anyway. Not ready, I do it anyway. Because every time I followed through, I was building something stronger than motivation. I was building trust in myself, and that trust became my foundation. I spent the entire year of 2025 doing things that once would have sent my anxiety through the roof. Sleeping alone, making decisions alone, raising my children through seasons I didn't think I could handle, taking my boys on trips on my own, doing life on my own terms. And what once felt impossible slowly became normal. And looking back, I realized those moments weren't just experiences, they were proof. Brick by brick, I was building a foundation of faith in myself. I didn't need to be saved. I didn't need to be chosen. I could choose myself. People talk about courage, but the biggest thing I discovered wasn't courage, it was audacity. The audacity to choose myself. The audacity to believe I deserved a life that felt as good as it looked. The audacity to stop performing a life and start creating one. Maybe that's what this journey really was. Not moving cross country, not starting over, not even Las Vegas, but finding the audacity to believe that I was worth betting on. I spent so much of my life proving myself to everyone else. Then one day I stopped. I trusted the woman who had already survived everything life had thrown at her. Today I don't know exactly what comes next, but for the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm coming home to myself. I'm choosing growth over comfort, faith over fear, possibility over regret. Because the goal isn't to arrive at the end of life with a list of dreams and one days still left undone. It's to arrive with stories, memories, proof that you showed up for your own life and the positive impact you had on others along the way. Soul connections. The road wasn't taking me to Las Vegas. It was taking me back to myself. This isn't the end of a chapter. It's the beginning of a life I've been searching for all along. Something true to me. I'm still a work in progress, but I'm no longer abandoning myself along the way. I've always made my own rules, but now when I say I love you more, I'm talking to myself, and I finally mean it.